Please, sir, don't leave me out here. The words were small, almost swallowed by the wind, but they reached Charles Whitmore just as the revolving glass doors of the Langford Hotel began to turn behind him. For one brief second, the billionaire stopped with one polished black shoe on the marble threshold and the other pointed toward the warmth inside, where chandeliers glittered like captured stars and a string quartet played softly above the murmur of donors, senators, and executives. Outside, Chicago was locked in a hard January cold, the kind that turned breath white and made every streetlight look lonely. Snow drifted sideways across Michigan Avenue, brushing against the brass railings, the Blacktown cars, the velvet ropes, and the small girl standing beside the entrance with a yellow knitted scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She could not have been more than 8. Her coat was too thin for weather like this, her sneakers dark with melted snow, her brown fingers tucked under her arms as she tried not to shiver in front of people who had already decided not to see her. Charles had just finished giving a speech upstairs about protecting children during winter emergencies. He had stood beneath a gold banner that read Whitmore Global Children's Relief Gala and promised $2 million for warming shelters, emergency blankets, and mobile medical vans. Cameras had flashed. Hands had clapped. A city councilwoman had called him a man with a heart big enough for the whole city. Now, 10 minutes later, an actual child stood 3 feet from him, asking for nothing more than a few minutes inside. Please, the girl said again, her voice careful, respectful, almost rehearsed. My grandma was supposed to meet me at the bus stop, but she didn't come. I just need to wait where it's warm. I won't touch anything. Charles looked down at her the way he looked at unexpected interruptions, quickly, efficiently, with irritation hidden behind manners. His silver tie was still straight. His overcoat hung perfectly from his shoulders. Behind him, through the glass, the gala glowed with soft amber light, women in evening gowns laughing over champagne, men in tuxedos, checking their watches, waiters carrying trays of tiny desserts no hungry child would ever understand. Where are your parents? He asked. I live with my grandma, the girl answered. Her name is Ruth Brooks. She cleans offices on Wabash. She told me if anything went wrong, find a safe building and ask a grown-up. Her eyes lifted to the banner visible through the doors. This looked safe. Something in that sentence should have slowed him. It should have cut through the polished noise of his evening and found the part of him that remembered being someone's father before being someone's chairman. But Charles Whitmore had trained himself for years not to be pulled off course by emotion. His company moved medical equipment across 40 states. His schedule was measured in 15-minute blocks. His reputation had been built on discipline, on control, on the quiet belief that problems belong to systems, not doorways. A security guard stepped closer, uncertain. Mr. Whitmore, is there a problem? The girl's shoulders tightened, but she did not run. She only hugged her yellow scarf closer, as if it were the last warm thing in the city. I'm not here to bother anyone, she said. I just need to call my grandma. My phone died. Charles glanced toward the elevators, where his assistant was already waiting with a tablet pressed to her chest. In 20 minutes, he had a private meeting with investors from Dallas. In 40, he was due on a video call with a hospital network in California. His son Oliver had texted twice that evening, asking if he could come by the hotel after dinner. Charles had replied with one sentence, "Not tonight, buddy. Big event." He had not noticed the third message, still unread in his pocket. "This is a private event," Charles said, his voice low enough to sound civilized and cold enough to end the conversation. "The lobby cannot become a waiting room." The girl blinked, not because she did not understand, but because she did. That was worse. She nodded once, like a child accepting a rule she had heard too many times. "Yes, sir." The guard cleared his throat. "Come on, sweetheart. You'll have to step away from the doors." "Can I stand under the awning?" she asked. "Just until the next bus?" The guard looked to Charles, and Charles gave the smallest shake of his head. Not cruel, not angry, barely a movement at all. But it was enough. The guard opened the door and guided her out into the wind. The cold rushed in, sharp and immediate. A few guests near the coat check glanced over, then away. Someone laughed at the bar. The quartet moved into a brighter song. The revolving door carried Charles back inside, separating him from the girl with a curved wall of glass. For one moment, she was framed there in the reflection of the gala behind him. A little black girl in wet sneakers, standing beneath snow, her yellow scarf bright against the dark street like a tiny flame that refused to go out. Charles told himself she would be fine. Chicago had shelters. Hotels had policies. Security had procedures. Adults had responsibilities. He had donated enough money tonight to warm hundreds of children, maybe thousands. Surely that counted for something. He turned away before the thought could become a question. His assistant approached, speaking quickly about the investors waiting upstairs, the revised numbers, the weather delay at O'Hare. Charles nodded without listening. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he silenced it with one practiced press. Outside, Nia Brooks stood under the edge of the hotel awning until the guard looked uncomfortable and pointed her farther down the sidewalk. She did not argue. She tucked her chin into the yellow scarf her grandmother had knitted last winter and started walking south, one careful step at a time, past the black cars, past the glittering windows, past the banner with Charles Whitmore's name printed in gold. The wind pushed at her back. Snow gathered on her braids. At the corner, she turned once and looked through the hotel glass. She could still see Charles inside, surrounded by warmth and applause, already forgetting her. Nia did not know his name yet. She did not know he had a son. She did not know that before the night was over, the same man who had left her in the cold would hear her voice again and pray with everything he had that she had not walked away. By the time Charles Whitmore reached the 32nd floor, the sound of the wind had vanished behind thick glass, wool carpet, and the quiet hum of private elevators. The Langford Hotel seemed designed to erase the outside world. Every hallway smelled faintly of cedar, polished brass, and expensive flowers. Every door closed softly. Every light was warm enough to make winter feel like something that happened to other people. Charles walked into the private conference suite without removing his overcoat, still carrying the faint cold from the lobby on his shoulders. 6 investors stood when he entered. His assistant, Marlene Price, began explaining that Mr. Whitmore had only a limited window before his next call, but Charles lifted one hand, and the room settled immediately. That was what people did around him. They settled. They adjusted. They waited for him to decide the temperature of the room. On the table, a digital presentation glowed with maps of shipping routes, hospital supply chains, and numbers large enough to change cities. Charles leaned over the screen and forced himself back into the language he understood: margins, delivery times, liability, growth. Yet beneath every sentence, beneath every polished answer, another image pressed at him like a fingerprint on glass. A yellow scarf, wet sneakers, a child asking whether the building was safe. He pushed the thought away because he had spent his life believing that control was the same as strength. Across town, inside the Whitmore estate in Lincoln Park, Oliver Whitmore sat alone at the bottom of a wide staircase, wearing a navy coat zipped to his chin and one glove on his left hand. His other glove lay beside him because he had taken it off to text his father again. The house around him was enormous and quiet, with white columns, framed photographs, and rooms so carefully arranged they felt more like a museum than a home. In one photograph near the entryway, Oliver was 5 years old, standing on Charles's shoulders at a Cubs game, both of them laughing into the sun. Oliver looked at that picture often, not because he remembered the game clearly, but because he wanted proof that his father once knew how to laugh. Without checking his phone, he stared at the screen now, reading the message he had sent 20 minutes earlier. "Dad, I know you are busy, but can I come see the lights outside the hotel?" No reply. The housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, had told him gently that his father would be home late. Graham Keller, his father's private security coordinator, had told him more firmly that the weather was getting worse and children did not belong downtown on a night like this. Oliver had nodded as if he agreed, then sat by the stairs and waited anyway. He was 10, old enough to understand schedules, but still young enough to believe promises should feel warm. When Graham stepped into the foyer, his black coat was buttoned wrong, and his phone was pressed hard against his ear. He spoke in a low voice, sharp and impatient, then ended the call the moment he noticed Oliver watching. "Why are you still down here?" Graham asked. Oliver stood quickly. "I thought maybe Dad changed his mind." Graham glanced toward the window where snow blew across the front lawn in silver streaks. "Your father is in meetings. He does not have time tonight. He said maybe after the gala. Maybe is not yes." Oliver looked down at his single glove. The words were not loud, but they landed heavily. Graham checked his watch, then looked toward the driveway. One of the regular drivers had called in because of the storm. Another was already waiting at the hotel. Graham was supposed to stay with Oliver until Charles returned, but his own plans had shifted and impatience flickered across his face. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice into something almost kind. "I can arrange a quick drive past the hotel. You can see the lights from the car. You will be back before anyone makes a fuss." Oliver's eyes lifted. "Really? Really? But you do exactly what I say. No calling your father. No making this dramatic. Just a short ride." Oliver hesitated, caught between excitement and the small warning bell that children often hear before adults admit anything is wrong. "Does Dad know?" Graham smiled without warmth. "Your father hired me to make decisions when he is unavailable." 10 minutes later, Oliver was in the back seat of a dark company SUV with a junior driver named Paul at the wheel, a nervous young man who kept both hands tight on the steering wheel and whispered directions to himself under his breath. Graham stood in the driveway just long enough to see the taillights disappear, then turned away, already dialing another number. Snow thickened over the city. The streets shone under traffic lights, black pavement glazed with ice and reflected red, green, and gold. Oliver pressed his forehead to the window as the SUV moved south, past brownstones, closed cafes, and sidewalks where people bent against the weather. He imagined the Langford Hotel glowing like a castle, imagined his father stepping outside and being surprised to see him, maybe even smiling. In the pocket of his coat, his phone buzzed with a low battery warning, but he ignored it. At the hotel, Charles finished the first half of his meeting with flawless precision. He approved 3 proposals, rejected 2, and corrected a financial projection without looking at his notes. Everyone in the room seemed impressed. No one noticed that his gaze drifted once toward the window, where snow blurred the city into a pale, moving wall. Marlene leaned close and whispered, "Your son called the house twice earlier." Mrs. Alvarez said he was restless. Charles kept his expression still. "I will call him after this." Of course. The meeting continued. Outside, 20 blocks away, Nia Brooks walked with her head down and the yellow scarf pulled over her mouth. Her grandmother had always told her that fear got smaller when you counted things, so Nia counted streetlights. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted bus stops. She counted her breaths. She told herself she was not scared, only cold, and cold was something a person could walk through if they kept moving. Then, beyond the edge of a small park where bare trees scratched at the snowy sky, she heard a sound that did not belong to the wind. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a dull slide, a soft thud, and then the faint, broken pulse of a car horn pressing weakly into the night. Nia stopped beneath a streetlight. Her breath froze in front of her. For a moment, every grown-up warning she had ever heard told her to keep walking, to find a bus, to stay away from trouble that was not hers. Then she heard a boy's voice, thin and frightened, calling from somewhere behind the trees. Nia turned toward the dark park path, tightened her hands around the ends of her yellow scarf, and stepped off the sidewalk. Nia moved toward the sound with the careful steps of someone who had learned to listen before trusting the dark. The park was small, only a few blocks wide, tucked between apartment buildings and a row of closed shops, but under the falling snow it felt much larger, almost endless. The bare trees bent over the path like old hands. The wind pushed loose flakes across the ground in pale ribbons. Somewhere ahead, the weak car horn sounded again, then stopped. Nia froze, holding her breath. For 1 second, there was only the hiss of snow against branches and the distant rush of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. Then came the voice again, small and shaky. "Hello? Is somebody there?" Nia swallowed hard. "I am here," she called back, trying to make her voice stronger than she felt. "Where are you?" "By the fence," the boy answered. "I cannot open the door." Nia followed the voice past a line of snow-covered benches and saw the shape of a dark SUV near the edge of the service road, angled partly toward a chain-link fence behind the park. It had not gone far off the road, but it was stuck in a place hidden from the main street by trees and a storage shed. One headlight glowed weakly through the snow. The other blinked and went dark. Nia did not run straight to it. Her grandmother had taught her that being brave did not mean being careless. She looked around first. No smoke, no flames, no shouting adults, no one else nearby. The front of the vehicle was pressed into a snowbank, and the tires had carved dark lines in the slush. The driver was sitting still behind the wheel, awake but dazed, blinking toward the windshield as if trying to understand where he was. In the back seat, a boy with light brown hair pressed one hand against the window. His eyes were wide. His face was pale in the blue glow from the dashboard. "Please," he said when he saw Nia. "My phone is almost dead." Nia stepped closer but stayed outside the path of the vehicle. "Are you hurt?" "I do not know," the boy whispered. "I am scared." "Can you move your hands?" He lifted both hands slowly. "Can you move your feet?" He nodded, then winced with worry more than pain. Nia looked at the driver. "Mister, can you hear me?" The young man in the front seat blinked toward her. "Yes, I think so." His voice sounded foggy but awake. "I called someone, but my phone lost signal." "Do not try to move yet," Nia said, repeating words she had once heard from a crossing guard after a bike accident near her school. "I am going to get help." The boy in the back pressed his palm harder to the glass. "Do not leave." The words hit Nia in a place deeper than fear. She remembered the hotel doors closing, the guard pointing down the sidewalk, the warm room turning away from her as if she had never been there. She stepped closer to the rear window and placed her small hand against the glass opposite his. "I will not leave," she said. "I just need to find a phone that works." "What is your name?" "Oliver." Nia blinked. The name felt familiar because she had heard it only minutes ago, muffled through the hotel glass, when a woman near the coat check had said something about Mr. Whitmore needing to call Oliver back. Then she saw the silver crest embroidered on the boy's coat, a small W inside a circle, the same mark she had seen on the banners inside the gala. Her stomach tightened. "Oliver Whitmore?" she asked. The boy stared at her. "How do you know that?" Nia did not answer right away. She looked back toward downtown, where the Langford Hotel was somewhere beyond the trees, bright and warm and impossible to reach from this patch of snow. The man who had sent her into the cold had a son sitting in front of her, frightened and waiting for someone to care enough to come. Nia could have felt angry. Maybe part of her did. But anger did not open doors, and it did not call ambulances, and it did not help a scared boy keep breathing slow. She pulled the yellow scarf from around her neck and held it up to the window. "My grandma says yellow helps people remember the sun," she said. "Look at this, okay? Keep looking at it." Oliver nodded, his eyes fixed on the scarf. Nia tied one end around the rear door handle so it hung bright against the black SUV. Then she turned toward the corner store across the street from the park. Its sign was dark, but a payphone stood under the awning, half covered in snow. She ran carefully, arms out for balance, shoes slipping once before she caught herself against a metal trash can. Behind her, Oliver called, "Are you coming back?" Nia turned, breath flashing white under the streetlight. "I promised, did I not?" She reached the payphone and lifted the receiver. For one terrible moment, there was no sound. Then a thin dial tone buzzed in her ear. Her fingers shook as she pressed 911. The operator answered with calm words, and Nia gave the location as best she could. The small park near East Delaware Place, behind the service road, dark SUV by the fence, one child inside, one driver awake but needing help. She repeated everything twice. When the operator told her to stay nearby, but keep a safe distance, Nia nodded even though no one could see her. "There is a boy named Oliver Whitmore," she said. "His father is Charles Whitmore. I think he is at the Langford Hotel." The operator asked if she had a number. Nia ran back to the SUV and asked Oliver to check his coat pockets without moving too much. He found a small medical card attached to a key ring in his backpack. With careful fingers, he held it against the window so Nia could read the emergency contact printed in black letters. Snow melted on her eyelashes as she memorized the number, then ran back to the payphone. The first call did not connect. The second rang so long, she almost thought no one would answer. Then a woman picked up, formal and rushed. "Office of Charles Whitmore." Nia gripped the receiver with both hands. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Tell Mr. Whitmore his son is in a car near the park, and the ambulance is coming. Tell him the girl from outside the hotel is with him. Tell him I came back." The woman on the phone did not understand. At first, Nia could hear music behind her, soft voices, the distant clink of glass, a whole warm world continuing as if nothing had changed. "I am sorry. Who is this?" the woman asked. Nia pressed the receiver closer to her ear and looked across the street at the dark SUV, where the yellow scarf moved in the wind like a small flag. "My name is Nia Brooks," she said, forcing each word to stay clear. "I was outside the hotel. Mr. Whitmore saw me. His son Oliver is in a car near the park by East Delaware Place. The ambulance is coming, but he needs his father." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for Nia to hear her own heartbeat. "Hold, please." "No, please do not put me on hold," Nia said quickly. "He is scared." But the line clicked, and for several seconds there was only a low electronic hum. Inside the conference suite on the 32nd floor, Charles Whitmore was standing at the head of the table while a man from Dallas explained winter distribution risk. A wall of glass behind them showed Chicago blurred by snow, streetlights glowing in soft circles far below. Charles's phone sat face down beside a folder, silenced again. Marlene stepped into the room with a strange expression, the kind assistants practice never showing unless the world has shifted beneath their feet. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. Charles did not look up. "Not now, sir." Something in her voice cut through the room. The investor stopped speaking. Charles turned. Marlene held her phone in one hand, her other hand pressed against her tablet, as if she needed something solid. "There is a child on the line. She says Oliver is in a vehicle near East Delaware Place. She says emergency services are on the way." For 1 second, Charles did not move. The words entered the room, but his mind rejected them like impossible numbers. Oliver was home. Oliver was safe. Oliver was always surrounded by staff, schedules, security, glass gates, backup plans. Then Marlene added, softer. She said she is the girl from outside the hotel. The room went silent in a way Charles had never heard before. Not respectful silence. Not business silence. A dead, stunned silence. His hand reached for the back of a chair, but he did not sit. "Put her through." Marlene tapped the screen and held the phone out. Charles took it, and the moment he heard the breath on the other end, he knew. Not her name. Not her story. Her voice. Small, careful, brave enough to ask for warmth, and then brave enough to call him again. "This is Charles Whitmore," he said, but the authority had drained out of his voice. "Where's my son?" Across the street, under the store awning, Nia straightened as if the voice itself carried weight. "Sir, he is inside a black SUV by the fence behind the park. The driver is awake, but Oliver is scared. I called 911. They said to wait where we can see the lights." Charles closed his eyes once. "Is he speaking?" "Yes, sir. I told him to look at my scarf. I tied it on the door so the ambulance can see the car." The yellow scarf. Charles saw it again in his mind. Bright against snow, bright against shame. "Did he say anything else?" "He asked me not to leave." Nia's voice softened, not accusing, only honest. "So I did not." Charles turned away from the table. The investors, the charts, the hotel suite, the $2 million pledge, all of it shrank until only a single truth remained. A child he had sent into the cold was standing in the cold to protect his son. "Stay on the line," he said. "I am coming." "I have to go back to him," Nia answered. "The phone cord does not reach that far." Nia. Her name left his mouth for the first time, and it sounded different from all the names he had spoken that evening. Less like a task, more like a plea. "Do not put yourself in danger." "I am staying on the sidewalk side," she said. "The lady from 911 told me." "I remember." Then she added, after a small breath, "Please hurry." The line clicked off. Charles stood still, holding the phone to his ear even after she was gone. Marlene whispered, "Sir?" He moved then, fast enough that the chair behind him rolled back into the wall. "Get the car." "No, get police dispatch on the line. Tell hotel security to clear the front entrance. I need the fastest route to East Delaware Place." "Of course. And find Graham." Marlene hesitated. "Graham Keller?" "Now." Charles was already moving toward the door. The investors stood awkwardly, one of them beginning to ask whether they should reschedule. Charles did not answer. He walked out so quickly his overcoat swung open behind him. In the elevator, the mirrored walls threw his reflection back at him from every side. White shirt, silver tie, expensive coat, face drained of color. He saw himself as the city had seen him an hour earlier, generous and powerful beneath golden lights. Then he saw Nia beneath the awning, asking to wait somewhere safe. His throat tightened. He pressed the lobby button again, though it was already lit. It did not make the elevator move faster. Nothing he owned could make it move faster. For a man who had built his life on speed, that helplessness was almost unbearable. When the elevator doors opened, the gala music spilled toward him, bright and obscene. Guests turned as Charles crossed the lobby without slowing. Someone called his name. Someone lifted a phone for a photograph. He ignored them all. At the revolving doors, he stopped for half a second. Through the glass, he saw the place where Nia had stood. Empty now. Snow had already softened her footprints. The guard from earlier looked at Charles and seemed to understand before a word was spoken. "Sir, I did not know she was going to walk off. I thought she had somewhere to go." Charles looked at him, and the anger that rose in him had nowhere clean to land because it belonged partly to himself. "So did I," he said. Outside, the cold struck him full in the face. His black sedan pulled up at the curb, tires whispering over slush. Marlene ran behind him, still on the phone with dispatch. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out. Police are en route. Oliver is conscious." Charles nodded once, but the words did not calm him. He climbed into the back seat and leaned forward. "East Delaware Place. Cut through Rush if you have to. Go." The car pulled into the storm. Snow swept across the windshield. The city lights stretched and blurred. Charles gripped his phone in one hand and stared ahead as if he could force the road open by will alone. In the silence of the moving car, Oliver's unread message finally lit up on his screen. "Dad, I just wanted to see you tonight." Charles read it once. Then again. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance. Thin at first, then growing louder, cutting through the winter dark toward the park where a little girl with a yellow scarf had done what he had failed to do. She had come back. The first siren reached the park before Charles did, bending through the snowy streets like a silver thread being pulled tight. Nia heard it from beside the service road, where she stood exactly where the emergency operator had told her to stand, close enough to see Oliver, far enough to stay safe. The wind had numbed her cheeks, and her hands were tucked under her arms again, but her eyes never left the boy inside the SUV. The yellow scarf fluttered from the rear door handle, bright against the black paint and white snow, and Oliver kept looking at it, as if it were a promise tied there just for him. "They are coming," Nia called through the glass. "I hear them." Oliver nodded, trying to be brave. His lips trembled, but he did not cry. "Is my dad coming too?" Nia looked toward the street, where headlights smeared across the falling snow. She thought of Charles Whitmore's voice on the phone, no longer cold, no longer busy, only frightened. "Yes," she said. He sounded like he was running, even though he was standing still. Oliver gave the smallest smile, and for a moment, that was enough. The ambulance turned the corner first, red lights washing over the trees, the fence, the snowbank, and Nia's yellow scarf. 2 paramedics stepped out quickly, calm and focused, their boots crunching over the icy ground. A police cruiser followed. Then another set of headlights swept across the park path, faster than the others, and a black sedan stopped at the curb with its rear door opened before the wheels seemed fully still. Charles Whitmore stepped out without waiting for anyone to help him. He looked nothing like the man in the Golden Hotel lobby. His overcoat was open, his silver tie loosened, his hair damp from snow. His eyes searched the scene with raw, terrified urgency until they found the SUV. "Oliver," he called in. His voice cracked on the name. One paramedic lifted a hand. "Sir, please let us work. He is conscious. We need space." Charles stopped so abruptly that his shoes slid slightly on the slush. He forced himself back, but every part of him leaned toward the vehicle. Through the rear window, Oliver turned his head. "Dad." The word was faint through the glass, but Charles heard it. He pressed one hand over his mouth, then lowered it, breathing hard. "I am here, buddy. I am right here." The paramedics moved with practiced care, speaking gently to Oliver and the driver, checking the doors, checking the space around the vehicle, asking simple questions in soft voices. Nia stood near the curb, small beneath the streetlight, almost invisible beside the adults in reflective jackets. She wanted to step farther away, to disappear before anyone remembered she was the girl from the hotel doors. But Oliver saw her moving and lifted one hand toward the window. "Nia," he called. "Do not go." Charles turned then. For the first time since arriving, he truly saw her. Not as an interruption, not as a problem near a private event, not as a child who belonged somewhere else. He saw her wet sneakers, her thin coat, her braids dusted with snow, her arms folded tightly to keep warm. He saw the absence of the yellow scarf around her neck because it was tied to his son's door. He saw the girl he had left outside standing watch over the person he loved most in the world. His face changed slowly, not with shock alone, but with recognition so painful it seemed to age him where he stood. Nia looked down first. "I stayed where the operator said," she said quickly, as if she needed to prove she had followed the rules. "I did not touch the car. I only talked to him." Charles took one step toward her, then stopped, careful not to frighten her. "You called for help?" "Yes, sir. You called me. I used the number on his card. And you stayed with him." Nia looked past him toward Oliver. "He asked me not to leave." The words landed between them, quiet and devastating. Charles remembered the lobby. He remembered her asking not to be left outside. He remembered the slight shake of his head that had sent her back into the snow. Behind him, the paramedics opened the rear door with slow, careful movements. Oliver was wrapped in a thermal blanket, alert but shaken, his eyes searching for his father and then for Nia. "She kept talking," Oliver told the paramedic. "She told me to look at the scarf." "That was smart," the paramedic said. "Very smart." Nia's shoulders rose a little, not with pride exactly, but with relief that she had done something right. Charles moved beside the stretcher as Oliver was guided safely out and checked again under the glow of emergency lights. He reached for his son's hand, and Oliver held on tightly. For a moment, Charles could not speak. He had signed billion-dollar agreements with less trembling in his fingers. Oliver looked up at him through the silver edge of the blanket. "Dad," she came back. Charles swallowed. "I know. She was cold too." Charles closed his eyes briefly. "I know that too." The police officer asked Nia a few basic questions, her name, her age, where she had been walking from. When she answered that she had been at the Langford Hotel, the officer glanced at Charles, and the silence sharpened. Charles did not defend himself. He did not explain policy or security or private events. He simply stood there, holding his son's hand, letting the truth stand in the open where everyone could see it. A paramedic turned to Nia. "You need to warm up, young lady. Come sit in the ambulance for a minute." Nia hesitated. "I have to find my grandma." "We will help with that," the officer said kindly. Charles immediately looked at Marlene, who had arrived in the second car, still breathless from coordinating calls. "Find Ruth Brooks," he said. "Office cleaning on Wabash. Call every building if you have to. And get someone from the hotel to check the bus stop." Marlene nodded and stepped away. Nia watched this happen with cautious confusion, as if adults helping without being asked was a language she was not sure she trusted. Charles crouched slightly, not too close, lowering himself until he was no longer towering over her. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his expensive coat. "Nia," he said, and his voice was quiet enough for only her to hear. "I am sorry." She looked at him then. Her eyes were tired, steady, and far older than 8 years old should ever have to be. "For what?" she asked. The question hurt more than an accusation would have. Charles looked toward the hotel lights hidden beyond the storm, then back at the child before him. "For not listening the first time." Nia did not answer. She only looked at Oliver, who was being settled safely into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, Oliver reached out with one hand. The yellow scarf had been untied from the SUV and placed beside him. "This is yours," he said. Nia stepped closer as a paramedic handed it back. The scarf was damp, cold, and twisted from the wind, but when she wrapped it around her neck again, Charles felt something inside him break open. Oliver looked at his father. "Can she ride with us?" Charles turned to Nia, then to the paramedic. "Is that allowed?" The paramedic nodded. "She should be checked for cold exposure anyway." Nia hesitated on the snowy curb, looking at the open ambulance, the warm light inside, the billionaire waiting for her answer, and the boy who had asked her not to leave. At last, she climbed in carefully. Charles followed after Oliver, sitting across from her as the doors closed against the storm. The ambulance began to move, and for the first time that night, Nia was inside the warmth. But Charles Whitmore could not stop staring at the yellow scarf around her neck, because it no longer looked like a child's winter clothing. It looked like a verdict. The ambulance ride to Northwestern Memorial Hospital felt longer than the distance on any map. Outside, Chicago slid past in streaks of white and red, traffic lights blurred by snow, storefronts closing early, pedestrians bent against the wind. Inside, the world was reduced to warm air, soft medical voices, the steady rumble of tires, and Oliver's hand gripping his father's fingers as if he were afraid the city might take him away again. Charles sat beside his son, but his eyes kept drifting toward Nia. She was wrapped in a gray emergency blanket now, her yellow scarf tucked carefully beneath her chin. A paramedic had given her a paper cup of warm water, and she held it with both hands, not drinking much, just letting the heat seep into her fingers. She did not complain. She did not ask where they were going. She only watched Oliver with quiet concern, the way someone watches over a candle in a drafty room. Charles had seen adults accept awards with less dignity than this child accepted kindness. When the ambulance doors opened beneath the bright white lights of the emergency entrance, Oliver was guided inside for evaluation, and Charles followed close enough to hear every question, every answer, every small reassurance. The driver, Paul, was taken to another room to be checked as well. Nia stayed near the wall, still wrapped in the blanket, her sneakers leaving damp marks on the polished floor. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and winter coats. Nurses moved quickly but gently. A security officer opened a set of double doors. Somewhere, a baby cried, then quieted. Charles stood in the middle of it all, useless in a way he was not accustomed to being. He could pay for wings of hospitals. He could fund research labs. He could put his name on buildings where other people saved lives. But here, in this hallway, the only thing that mattered had already been done by a little girl who had no coat warm enough for the night. A doctor with kind eyes came out after checking Oliver and explained that he was stable, awake, and being monitored as a precaution. Charles nodded, but the relief moved through him unevenly, almost painfully. He thanked the doctor, then turned and found Nia sitting in a plastic chair near a vending machine, her feet not quite touching the floor. She had finally taken a sip from the cup. The emergency blanket had slipped from one shoulder, and she kept tugging it back up as if she was afraid someone might take it away if she looked too comfortable. Charles walked over slowly. "They said Oliver is going to be okay," he said. Nia looked up, and the breath she released was so deep it seemed she had been holding it since the park. "Good," she whispered. He was trying to be brave. "So were you." She shrugged, eyes dropping to her cup. "I was just there." Charles sat in the chair beside her, leaving space between them. For the first time in years, he did not know how to begin a conversation. In boardrooms, silence was leverage. Here, silence was a mirror, and he did not like what it showed him. He reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet. "Nia, I want to thank you properly." She looked at the wallet, then at him, and something guarded passed over her face. "I do not want money." Charles stopped. "I was not trying to insult you." "I know." Her voice stayed polite. That made it worse. "But my grandma says you do not charge people for doing what is right." The sentence settled between them with more force than any accusation. Charles closed the wallet slowly. Across the hallway, a television mounted near the ceiling played silent footage from the gala, caption scrolling under an image of him at the podium. There he was, standing beneath warm lights, promising compassion to a ballroom full of people who applauded easily, because compassion had cost them nothing in that moment. Charles watched himself on the screen and felt a cold deeper than the weather outside. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," he said. Nia's face softened at once. "She is. She used to say if you have two good hands, one is for helping yourself and one is for helping somebody else." "Where is she now?" Nia looked toward the sliding doors as if Ruth Brooks might walk through them at any second. "She was supposed to meet me after work. Sometimes her bus is late when it snows. Sometimes her knees hurt, and she has to sit down for a while. But she always comes." Charles heard the careful faith in her voice and recognized the fear beneath it. Before he could answer, Marlene hurried into the emergency lobby with snow in her hair and her phone against her ear. She spotted Charles and walked over, lowering her voice. "We found the building on Wabash." Ruth Brooks finished her shift, but she slipped on the sidewalk outside and was taken to St. Anne's Clinic by a church volunteer. She is being treated for a minor ankle injury. She has been asking for Nia. Nia stood so quickly the blanket slid to the floor. "My grandma is hurt." Marlene immediately softened. "She is awake, sweetheart. She is okay." She was worried because she could not reach you. Nia pressed both hands over her mouth, and for the first time that night, tears gathered in her eyes. Not loud tears, not helpless tears, just the quiet overflow of a child who had been brave for too long. Charles bent to pick up the blanket and placed it gently around her shoulders again. "We will take you to her," he said. Nia looked at him, uncertain. "But Oliver is safe here. I will make sure of it. And I will make sure you see your grandmother." She studied his face as if deciding whether this version of him was real. Before she could answer, the doors to Oliver's room opened, and Oliver called weakly from inside. "Nia?" Charles and Nia both turned. Oliver was sitting up in bed, a small hospital blanket over his lap, his hair messy, his face tired but alert. A nurse stood nearby, smiling. "He asked if his friend was still here," she said. Nia walked to the doorway, but did not cross it until the nurse nodded. Oliver held out the yellow scarf, which had slipped from Nia's shoulder earlier and somehow ended up beside him. "You forgot this." Nia took it and gave him a small smile. "You keep finding it." "It helped," he said. "When I looked at it, I knew you were still there." Charles stood behind them, unable to speak. Oliver looked past Nia at his father. "Dad, can she come back tomorrow?" Nia answered before Charles could. "I have school if Grandma says I can go." Oliver nodded seriously. "After school then." For the first time that night, Nia almost laughed. It was small, fragile, and gone quickly, but Charles heard it. He realized with a painful clarity that his son had sounded more alive speaking to this girl than he had in weeks speaking across the dinner table at home. A police officer entered the hall then, followed by a hospital administrator. Their faces were professional but tense. "Mr. Whitmore," the officer said, "when you have a moment, we need to discuss who authorized the vehicle transporting your son tonight. There are some questions about the assigned security protocol." Charles's relief tightened into something sharper. Graham Keller was responsible. Marlene looked up from her phone. "Sir, Graham is not answering." A quiet shift moved through the hallway. Nia, still holding the scarf, glanced toward Charles. "Was he the man in the black coat?" she asked. Charles turned slowly. "What man?" Nia's fingers tightened around the yellow yarn. "Before the ambulance came, I saw someone by the SUV. He was not the driver. He took something small from near the front window and put it inside his coat." The officer's expression changed. Charles felt the room grow colder, even under the hospital lights. "Nia," he said carefully, "are you sure?" She looked straight at him. "Yes, sir. I remember because he looked at the scarf, and then he walked away fast." Charles stared down the hallway, where the bright floor reflected doctors, nurses, and passing shadows. Hours earlier, he had dismissed this child's voice at a hotel door. Now that same voice was opening the first crack in a truth someone wanted buried. He looked back at Nia, and this time, he did not hesitate. "Officer," Charles said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever she saw, we take it seriously." Charles did not raise his voice after Nia spoke, and somehow that made the hallway feel even quieter. The police officer, whose badge read Daniels, asked Nia to sit in a small family consultation room just off the emergency department, where the lights were softer and the noise from the hallway came through as a low blur. Marlene brought hot chocolate from the cafeteria, and a nurse found a pair of dry hospital socks that made Nia's feet look tiny inside them. Charles stood near the door while Officer Daniels pulled up a chair across from her. He did not crowd her. He did not answer for her. He only stayed where she could see him, because something in Nia's eyes told him that grown-ups had too often stepped into rooms and taken control of stories that belonged to her. "Nia," Officer Daniels said gently, "I just need you to tell me what you remember. There is no wrong answer. If you are not sure, you can say you are not sure." Nia nodded, both hands around the paper cup. "I am sure about the man." Charles felt his jaw tighten. "What did he look like?" the officer asked. "Tall, white, black coat, no hat. His hair was wet from the snow. He walked fast, like he did not want anybody to see him." "Did you see his face?" Nia thought carefully. "Only from the side. But I saw his shoes." The officer glanced up. His shoes. They were shiny, like the men at the hotel. But one shoe had a silver mark near the heel. Like a scratch, but brighter. Charles turned slowly toward Marlene. Her eyes had already sharpened. Graham Keller wore custom black dress shoes with a small silver heel plate, a detail he bragged about because, as he once said, cheap shoes made a man look replaceable. Charles said nothing, but the memory moved through him like a door opening into a room he wished he had never entered. Officer Daniels continued. "You said he took something from near the front window." "Yes, sir." He opened the front door a little. Not all the way. He reached near the windshield, and took a small black thing. Maybe a camera. My grandma's neighbor has one in his truck. It sticks near the glass. A dash camera, Daniels said. Nia nodded. Then he looked at the yellow scarf on the back door. He saw me across the street by the pay phone, and he walked away fast. Charles exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, but his hands curled at his sides. The thought of Graham near that vehicle before help arrived, not calling out, not checking Oliver, not staying, not helping, sent a cold anger through him. But beneath the anger was something even worse, recognition. Charles had built a world where men like Graham learned that appearances mattered more than people, that mistakes were to be managed before they were confessed, that reputation was a house to protect even if someone was left outside in the snow. Marlene, Charles said quietly, pull the vehicle assignments for tonight. Every message, every call, every location ping. Already requesting them, she said. And hotel security? The Langford has footage from the front entrance, garage exit, and the east service lane. They are sending it. Officer Daniels looked at Charles. We will need official copies. You will have them. The door opened then, and a hospital administrator leaned in. Mr. Whitmore, Graham Keller, is in the lobby. He says he came as soon as he heard. Nia's shoulders rose slightly under the blanket. Charles saw it. So did Officer Daniels. He does not come in here, Charles said. The administrator blinked. Sir, not near her. Not near my son. Put him in another room. His voice stayed low, but the finality in it made everyone move. 10 minutes later, Charles stood behind the glass wall of a separate consultation room, while Graham Keller spoke with a confidence so smooth it seemed practiced in the mirror. Graham's black coat was folded over one arm. His hair was damp. His expression was arranged into concern, but not enough concern to disturb his posture. Charles, thank God Oliver is stable, he said the moment Charles entered. I was coordinating from the other side of town. Paul made a bad call taking that route. Weather conditions changed quickly. Charles closed the door behind him. Why was Paul driving Oliver anywhere? Graham's eyes flickered, barely. Oliver insisted on seeing you. You know how children can be. Paul thought a short drive might calm him down. Paul thought. It was a judgment error. Whose judgment? Graham sighed, as if saddened by the inconvenience of honesty. Mine in part, perhaps. But there was no negligence. The roads were icy. These things happen. Charles looked at him for a long moment. In the past, he might have accepted that answer because it was clean, because it protected the company, because it gave everyone a shape to stand behind. Tonight, he heard what was missing. No mention of Nia. No mention of the call. No mention of the scarf tied to the door. No mention of a child keeping another child calm in the cold. Where is the dash camera? Charles asked. Graham's face remained still. What dash camera? The one mounted in the SUV. If there was one, police can check the vehicle. If there was one, Graham spread his hands. Charles, I understand you are upset, but you need to be careful. A frightened child may have misunderstood what she saw. Behind Charles, Marlene stepped into the room holding her tablet. The vehicle inventory from this morning lists a front dash camera, rear cabin camera, and location tracker. The maintenance log confirms they were active at 6:12 this evening. Graham's expression tightened for the first time. Then maybe the impact dislodged it. Charles turned to Marlene. She tapped the tablet, and the screen filled with grainy security footage from the Langford Hotel's east service lane. There was Graham at 8:47, standing beside the secondary SUV, speaking to Paul. There was Oliver climbing into the back seat. There was Graham checking his phone, then stepping away. Another clip followed, from a traffic camera near the park. It was distant, blurred by snow, but clear enough. A man in a black coat approaching the SUV after it had stopped, opening the front door, leaning inside, then walking away toward the side street. The silver mark near one heel flashed once beneath the streetlight. Graham said nothing. The room seemed to lose air. Charles looked at the frozen image, then at Graham. She saw you. Graham's mouth tightened. Charles, listen to me. This can be handled. Your son is safe. No one needs a scandal. The girl is a minor from the street. She was cold, confused, overwhelmed. If this turns into a public narrative, it will damage the foundation, the company, Oliver's privacy, everything you built. Charles stared at him, and for a second he saw the old version of himself standing beside Graham, calculating, controlling, weighing truth against damage. Then he looked through the glass wall across the hall. Nia sat with her yellow scarf in her lap, answering Officer Daniels with careful patience. Oliver's room was beyond her, door partly open, his small voice asking a nurse whether his father was still there. Charles felt the last fragile excuse inside him collapse. "Everything I built," he said slowly, "means nothing if I need a child to remind me what the truth sounds like." Graham's polished concern hardened. "You are making an emotional decision." "No," Charles said. "For once, I am making a human one." He opened the door and signaled Officer Daniels. "Mr. Keller has information relevant to your investigation. My company will provide every recording, every message, and every vehicle record tonight." Graham stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Charles, do not do this." Charles turned back, his eyes cold now, but clear. "I ignored her once," he said. "I will not do it again." Across the hall, Nia looked up through the glass. She did not know every word being spoken, but she saw Charles standing between her and the man in the black coat. She saw the police officer enter the room. She saw Graham's confidence falter. And for the first time since the hotel doors had closed in her face, Nia allowed herself to believe that maybe this time, the grown-up with power was going to use it the right way. By midnight, the hospital had grown quieter, but not peaceful. The emergency department still breathed with soft footsteps, distant wheels, elevator chimes, and voices lowered out of respect for people waiting on news that could change their lives. Charles stood outside Oliver's room with his phone in his hand, reading messages that arrived faster than he could answer. Lawyers, board members, hotel security, public relations. Graham Keller's name was already moving through the company like a crack through glass. Marlene stood beside him, tired but steady, holding a folder of printed records because Charles had asked for paper, something real, something he could place in front of people who were too skilled at hiding behind screens. Inside the room, Oliver slept under hospital blankets, safe, watched over by nurses who moved with gentle precision. Across the hallway, Nia sat beside her grandmother, Ruth Brooks, who had been brought from St. Anne's Clinic in a wheelchair with her ankle wrapped and a borrowed coat over her shoulders. The moment Ruth saw Nia, she opened her arms, and Nia stepped into them without a word. Charles had looked away then, not because he was uninterested, but because the reunion felt sacred, and he had already taken too much from that child's night. Ruth thanked him politely, but her eyes held caution. She was a black woman in her 60s who had cleaned enough offices, hotels, and private buildings to understand that wealthy people often used kindness like a camera flash, bright for 1 second, gone the next. Charles felt that caution and knew he had earned it before she ever met him. Officer Daniels entered the hall carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the missing dash camera, recovered from Graham's coat after he agreed to cooperate with investigators. No one said the word confession in front of Nia. No one needed to. The truth had already begun arranging itself under the hospital lights. "Mr. Whitmore," Officer Daniels said, "we have enough to continue formally. We will handle this carefully, especially because children are involved." Charles nodded. "My son's privacy comes first. Nia's too." The officer glanced toward Nia and Ruth. "She did very well." Charles looked at the little girl wrapped in the yellow scarf. "She did better than all of us." A few minutes later, Graham was escorted past the end of the hallway, not in chaos, not in spectacle, just a man whose polished version of the night had finally lost its shine. He did not look at Oliver's room. He looked at Charles. "You know this will not stay quiet," Graham said, his voice tight. "The press will turn it into something ugly. They will use her face, your son's fear, the gala, all of it. You think you are protecting her, but you are handing her to a machine." Charles felt the old instinct rise, the instinct to manage, to contain, to build walls before anyone could see the damage. Then Nia looked up from her grandmother's side. She did not understand every piece of what Graham had said, but she understood tone. She understood when adults spoke about her like she was not in the room. Charles stepped forward, placing himself between Graham and the family across the hall. "No," he said. "That is what men like you do when truth becomes inconvenient. You call it a machine, then feed people into it." Graham's jaw worked. "You are not thinking clearly." "I have never been clearer." Charles turned to Officer Daniels. "Please continue." Graham was led away, his footsteps fading into the low hospital noise. No one clapped. No one cheered. Justice, Charles realized, did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came quietly, in the form of a child being believed the first time she told the truth. Marlene approached, with another call waiting, but Charles shook his head. Not yet. He crossed the hall and stopped a respectful distance from Ruth and Nia. Mrs. Brooks, he said, I owe you both an apology. Ruth held Nia's hand in both of hers. My granddaughter told me what happened at the hotel. Charles absorbed the sentence without defending himself. Then you know I failed her. Ruth's eyes remained steady. I know she asked for shelter. Yes. I know she was sent back outside. Yes. And I know she helped your boy anyway. Charles looked at Nia. Yes. Ruth studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then do not make her kindness about your guilt, Mr. Whitmore. Guilt fades when people get busy again. The words struck cleanly. Charles nodded. You are right. Nia looked between them, uncertain. Grandma, he said he was sorry. Ruth squeezed her hand. Sorry matters, baby. But what people do after sorry matters more. Charles had heard thousands of speeches about accountability, had paid consultants to teach it to executives, had signed ethics pledges framed in glass. None of them had said it as simply as Ruth Brooks in a hospital hallway after midnight. He lowered himself into the chair across from them, not as a chairman, not as a donor, not as a man expecting forgiveness because he had finally found shame, but as a father who had almost lost the right to call himself attentive. Then let me start with what I can do tonight, he said. Your ankle will be treated here if you allow it. I will arrange a safe ride home for both of you when the doctors clear you. Not a camera, not a statement, just help. And tomorrow, if you are willing, I want to meet with the Langford Hotel and the Foundation Board about opening emergency warming access at every building we fund. No child should have to prove they are worth a warm lobby. Ruth did not soften quickly. People who had carried hard winters rarely did. That should have been true before Nia found your son. Charles looked down. It should have. Nia leaned against her grandmother, the yellow scarf bright against the gray blanket. Can Oliver still come visit after school? She asked. The question was so ordinary, so gentle after everything, that Charles almost lost his voice. Ruth looked at him, and for the first time, the edge in her eyes eased by a fraction. That depends on whether his father learns how to show up. Charles turned toward Oliver's room, where his son slept beneath soft hospital light. Then back to Nia, the child who had stayed when he had not. He will, Charles said. Starting now. Just then, Oliver stirred and called weakly from the room. Dad? Charles stood immediately, but before stepping inside, he looked at Nia. Would you like to say goodnight to him first? Nia glanced at Ruth, who nodded. She walked to Oliver's doorway in the dry hospital socks, her steps quiet on the floor. Oliver opened his eyes and smiled when he saw the yellow scarf. You are still here, he whispered. Nia smiled back. I told you I do not leave people alone. Charles stood behind her, silent, letting the words settle where they belonged. Not as a child's promise this time, but as a lesson powerful enough to remake a man. 3 weeks later, the snow in Chicago had softened into gray piles along the curbs, but the memory of that night had not melted from Charles Whitmore's life. It remained in the quiet places, in the empty chair across from him at breakfast when he finally put his phone face down, in Oliver's bedroom when his son told him about school, and Charles listened without checking the time, in the lobby of the Langford Hotel, where he could no longer pass the revolving doors without seeing a small girl framed in glass. Oliver recovered quickly, at least in the ways doctors could measure. He returned home with clear instructions, a stack of get-well cards from classmates, and a new habit of asking whether Nia was coming over after school. The first visit happened on a Thursday afternoon, after Ruth Brooks approved it with the careful seriousness of a grandmother who trusted slowly and loved fiercely. Charles sent no limousine, no camera crew, no assistant with flowers too expensive to feel personal. He drove himself in a dark blue SUV, waited outside Nia's school with Oliver in the back seat, and stepped out when Nia and Ruth approached. Ruth's ankle was still, supported by a brace, and Nia carried her backpack with the yellow scarf tied to one strap, swinging like a small banner beside her. Good afternoon, Mrs. Brooks, Charles said. Ruth looked at the vehicle, then at him. You driving today? Yes, ma'am. You know how to do that without an assistant? Oliver laughed from the back seat before Charles could answer, and the sound changed the whole sidewalk. Ruth almost smiled. We will see. That afternoon, Nia and Oliver sat at the Whitmore kitchen island eating grilled cheese sandwiches made by Charles himself, slightly uneven and too buttery at the edges. Oliver whispered that his father had watched a video online to learn how, and Nia tried not to giggle, but she did. Charles heard her from the sink and did not mind. The house no longer felt quite like a museum. There were board games on the coffee table, school papers on the counter, and a pair of damp children's boots by the door. A week after that, Charles returned to the Langford Hotel, not for a gala, not for applause, but for a meeting in a small conference room on the second floor. Ruth sat on one side of the table with Nia beside her. Marlene sat with a folder of revised policies. The hotel manager sat stiffly, his hands folded, while Charles explained what should have never required explanation. Beginning that winter, every building connected to the Whitmore Foundation would maintain a clearly marked emergency warming area during severe weather alerts. Children, older adults, and anyone waiting for transportation could enter without being treated like a threat. Security staff would be trained to call family, emergency services, or outreach support instead of simply moving people along. The program would not be named after Charles. He had insisted on that. When the hotel manager asked what it should be called, Charles looked toward Nia. She was quiet for a moment, rubbing the soft edge of her scarf between her fingers. "My grandma says yellow helps people remember the sun," she said. "Maybe something with that." Ruth touched her shoulder. "The Yellow Scarf House," Oliver suggested from the doorway. He had been waiting with Marlene, but had clearly been listening. Nia looked at him. "It is not a house." "It could feel like one," Oliver said. The room went still in the gentle way a room goes still when the right words arrive. And so the first Yellow Scarf House opened not in a grand new building, but inside the Langford Hotel lobby, near the same doors where Nia had once been turned away. On opening morning, there were no flashing cameras inside. Charles had made sure of it. There were folding tables with hot cocoa, baskets of gloves, phone chargers, bus carts, and volunteers from local churches, schools, and neighborhood groups. A small sign near the entrance read, "If you are cold, waiting, lost, or need help calling someone, you are welcome here." Nia stood with Ruth near the glass doors, wearing a clean winter coat Charles had not purchased until Ruth allowed him to, and even then only after Ruth made it clear that accepting help did not mean owing silence. Oliver stood beside Nia, holding 2 paper cups of cocoa, one for himself and one for her. Charles watched them from a few feet away, careful not to turn the moment into something he owned. Outside, a city bus sat at the curb. A woman helped an older man through the doors. A teenage boy came in to charge his phone. A mother with a stroller asked if she could wait 10 minutes until her ride arrived. The guard at the entrance smiled and said, "Of course. Come in where it is warm." Charles heard those words and felt his throat tighten. They were ordinary words. That was what made them powerful. Later, when the room had settled into a quiet rhythm, Ruth rolled closer to Charles, her ankles still healing, but her eyes as sharp as ever. "This is a start," she said. Charles nodded. "I know. A start is not the same as change." "No, ma'am." Ruth looked toward Nia, who was showing Oliver how to fold napkins into little paper tents for the cocoa table. "But it can become change if you keep showing up." Charles followed her gaze. Oliver laughed at something Nia said, and for once he did not look over his shoulder to see whether his father was watching, because he already knew Charles was there. "I plan to," Charles said. That evening, after the first yellow scarf house closed for the day, Charles stood alone in his office on the top floor of Whitmore Global. The city stretched below him in winter blue and gold, highways glowing, apartment windows flickering, the lake dark beyond the lights. On the wall behind his desk, where awards and framed magazine covers used to hang, there was now a simple shadow box. Inside it was not Nia's real scarf, because Ruth had said the child was keeping what belonged to her. Instead, Nia had given him a small piece of yellow yarn from the loose end, tied carefully into a knot. Beneath it, Charles had placed a handwritten card from Oliver that said, "She came back." Charles looked at those 3 words for a long time. They were not about guilt anymore. They were not even only about gratitude. They were instructions. Come back to the people you overlooked. Come back to the promises you made in rooms full of applause. Come back when kindness is inconvenient, when warmth costs more than words, when the person asking for help has nothing to offer except the chance for you to become human again. Behind him, the office door opened softly. Oliver stepped in with Nia beside him and Ruth just behind them, leaning on her cane. Dad, Oliver said. Nia says the scarf looks lonely in there by itself. Charles turned. Nia held up a small drawing she had made in colored pencil. A yellow scarf wrapped around two stick figures standing under falling snow, one small, one tall, both facing an open door. Charles took it carefully, as if it were more valuable than anything his company had ever shipped. May I put it next to the yarn? He asked. Nia nodded. So you remember the whole story. Charles looked at the drawing, then at the girl who had once asked him for a few minutes of warmth and gave his family a lifetime of light. I will, he said. Every day. And this time, when the door opened behind them and the cold hallway air drifted in, Charles Whitmore did not turn away. He held the door wider.